Okay, welcome to case number 2 for today. Again, at low power, this is a GI biopsy, and we see that it has some altered glandular architecture. Here's a fairly complex fragment, here's a fragment, another fragment. And even at this very low magnification, you can probably suspect that there's some sort of serrated type of architecture here. So let's go down a little bit higher magnification and see if that's the case. Here we see some complexity. We don't see a lot of loss of mucin, so that would lead us to think that we're dealing with some sort of a serrated lesion, either a hyperplastic polyp, although this is quite large, or a serrated adenoma of some sort. Here, looking at these fragments, again, we see this complex serrated appearance, and here we're starting to see a suggestion of something that's a little bit unusual for typical sessile serrated lesions. We see that this is sort of an exophytic lesion, and it's got a lot of secondary complexity to the glandular structure here. It's almost like we've got little crypts forming here, 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 along this more villous structure. So that's a clue to what's going on here. We'll look around and see what else we can find here. If we look over at this fragment over here, again we see the same sort of pattern, an almost undulating crypt-like structure on both sides of this villous frond. And we see that this is a villous frond. It's just very, very elongated with a very narrow core. This is not something that's cut on a bias. So this introduces us to the concept of the larger type of serrated adenoma, which is what is now called the traditional serrated adenoma. This is one that was recognized fairly early on. And these lesions usually appear in the left colon rather than the right colon. And this is where the traditional serrated pathway is also operative. Now here we see a little bit of nuclear stratification that may be related to electrocautery, because there's certainly cautery artifact over here. But this reminds us that these lesions more frequently develop conventional dysplasia, and that can make them sometimes difficult to distinguish from villous adenoma because of the architectural changes that we see. In fact, one rather interesting case that was published on the the Teachers of Pathology website for use in instruction was actually a traditional serrated adenoma that had been labeled as a villous adenoma, and actually appeared in the OU medical teaching materials for some years as such before it was corrected. So we don't see any really true dysplasia here, but with the presence of these quite well-developed secondary or ectopic crypts along the villous fronds, this qualifies as a traditional serrated adenoma and should be recognized and signed out as such. Now that distinction is of course important because the traditional serrated adenoma has a slightly different prognosis, and the follow-up would be similar for other moderate risk polyps with intervening colonoscopy at more frequent intervals.